Welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast series that brings you in-depth interviews for an insider's look at what makes our industry work. We will be speaking with snow industry professionals about life, about business and leadership in this often challenging and always satisfying industry. This episode of Snow Talk is brought to you by Western Snowplows. And now, enjoy Snow Talk, sponsored by Western.
Hello and welcome to Snow Talk, the Snow and Ice Management Association's podcast. I'm Evan Newman, your Senior Manager of Membership here at SIMA, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Today, I'm very excited to bring you more information on a very important topic. My guests today are Michael Wagner of Designscapes, Colorado, and Edwin Torres of East Coast Facilities, and we will be talking a little bit about creating a safety culture. To get us started, I just wanted to take a few moments to introduce and recognize the two gentlemen that will be joining us today. Michael, you're the Director of Company Operations. You have an MBA, a CAFM, CSP, and ASM. Tell us a little bit more about your day-to-day role with Designscapes. So what's your day typically look like?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Evan. So my day-to-day typically involves, I oversee asset and fleet management, the safety management of the entire organization, as well as a sizable portion of our snow and ice management operations. So we have public and private contracts, which I support and help within the public side of our contracting, but most of my work in the snow business falls in the residential and commercial side of the work we do. But my typical day is just filled with a combination of both. So I could say I never have 10 hours of any free time throughout my day to even think about what's next. And it's a lot on my plate, but I have to say I enjoy it and I love working in this industry.
Thanks, Michael. I know that a lot of folks share that same passion that you do, but at the end of the day, the most important takeaway is obviously something that I'm sure you and Edwin will probably share in, that every day is a new adventure, every day is a new journey, and something new kind of falls on your plate. So that's cool. And Edwin, you're the Director of the Home Office at East Coast Facilities, and you're an Advanced Snow Manager in ASM, which you attained through SIMA as well. But could you tell us a little bit more about your role with the company and what your daily routine looks like with East Coast?
Sure. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this podcast. So as Director of Home Office, I'm involved in more of the things that have a global impact in our operations, whether they be part of the finance team, HR, fleet, corporate purchasing, recruiting, training, and risk management. So I get to work with the directors of operations and our field guys to be able to help them and whatever changes we may need, or if we need to develop a new program, anything that would impact the organization as a whole, which is nice for me because sometimes, we're dealing with things in sunny Florida and other times we're dealing with snow and everything that brings along. So it keeps me very busy, much like Michael mentioned. There's no two identical days. Every day is changing a little bit, but it's something that I enjoy, and it's been a nice opportunity for me here to be a part of the organization and continue our goals as an organization.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing a little bit more about your role. I'm jealous of the time that you get to spend at least daydreaming about the Florida sun, or at least working with your team there. Being here in Ohio, it's pretty gray most winter days. But that being said, that's okay. We love snow, and that's why we're working or involved in some capacity with SIMA. And that's what we'll be talking a little bit about today, is this culture, the safety culture around snow and ice, and how we can really implement that together. So again, I just appreciate you both joining me, and we'll go ahead and get started. So as we heard in the Tales from the Drift episode of Snow Talk just a few weeks ago, this industry can present its fair share of challenges. We want to take some time to spotlight how preparedness, proactive behavior, and some proper training can help create a safety culture and help your company take steps toward keeping your workforce safe, your employees. So let's start with you, Edwin. Most companies recognize the need for a written safety manual and regular safety meetings to promote an understanding of policies, but sometimes it goes without saying that creating a safety culture goes beyond these things. So that in mind, what are some strategic priorities that East Coast Facilities maintains to ensure your team is working in line with that safety culture that you're trying to promote?
Yeah, I would say that I think it's been one of my goals since I joined the organization to really create a profound change for our employees and all those that are around us, right? So we're not looking for them to just be safe at work or be safe because I don't want to get in trouble. We want them to make a change as a whole. We want them to make safe decisions when they're driving home, when they're at home with their families. I often use the example of like how many of us need to change a light bulb at home and well, here's a chair, let me grab it, you know? And while many of us have done it and perhaps continue to do it, the reality is it's unsafe. So if we can take a few more steps and perhaps look for a step stool or a ladder or something, so by making our employees and helping them see the value of making safe decisions, then they now are invested and they're looking for ways to be safer and provide suggestions and contribute to all of our practices, right? Because we're not everywhere all the time. We don't see everything that goes on in the field. So if we have guys in the field that are now conscious of safety and looking at well, this doesn't look like a good situation. Let me either stop the music and readjust, or let me see what kind of suggestions I could get. How can we make this a more safe or an appropriate procedure?
Very smart, Edwin. I think that, I guess for lack of a better term, preaching some of those safety habits throughout not only professional life, but also carrying them over into personal life just keeps them top of mind. I wish that I could have heeded that advice a few weeks ago whenever I was hanging something in my house. I wish I would have grabbed that step stool because no injuries happen, but just to fall off that stool is a wake-up call that I should have just grabbed a step stool. So by all means, that's a good piece of advice. And Michael, how about you? Did your team have a list or a set of priorities that you're trying to promote within the Designscapes culture to promote that safety aspect?
Yeah, so and to kind of tag on to what Edwin said, one of my biggest words I use around here and one of my initiatives is the whole change process with people, whether it's the executive group or whether it's the rest of our field staff, equipment operators, shovelers, it doesn't matter who it is. But in the last 2 years, so in light of COVID, this position was actually developed. I was a mechanic on the floor, and then I kind of transitioned into the fleet management role. And then with COVID came this need for safety. And although we've had a very great track record with safety, we've also grown exponentially over the last few years. We've added a lot of permanent staff members instead of relying on our seasonal labor staff from Mexico as heavily as we used to. So it's created the need for us to change the mindset and the behaviors of both our executives and our field staff. And what I found the biggest challenges are is you really have to address these groups separately. But the biggest and most important piece is showing the employees that you value them and that you're invested in seeing them make those positive changes. So we have the same motto as Edwin and East Coast Facilities has. I mean, we perform training priorities and initiatives not just on the basis that we're taking care of you while you're here at work, but many of these tools are things that can carry you into your outside work hours. So we do a lot of vehicle and driver training, defensive driving, and we call it courtesy driving. So proper courtesy on the road and being able to make sure we get home safely, to work safely, whether we're taking our kids to school, whether we're just running to the grocery store. But then while we have drivers, as we put on, so last year we clocked a little over 2 million miles of vehicle travel miles. These are all exposures and risks, which just like Edwin talked about our risk profiles, it's super important to take that in and really hone in on where our greatest risks are and how we can make the most positive impact through our training priorities and initiatives. So while we have to address everyone a little bit differently, so that's kind of how we go about the field staff. But then when we talk executives, you're looking more at things like premiums and costs and increases. You're looking at productivity, whether it's indirect and direct billable hours versus, the image of are we eating costs because we're spending all this time with non-billable time doing training. But once you ingrain that in the mindset that what we're doing is to make a positive impact on every aspect of the organization and keeping people safe and at work, which ultimately influences productivity, I think that's where you really start to get over that change resistance and you really start to get it ingrained in everyone's head for the long run.
Interesting. I'm glad you mentioned taking a look at some of those real world examples, those driving records, those safety records of the employee. Not necessarily to say I'm shining a spotlight on something you did wrong, but hey, we want to just take a closer look at how we can continue to improve. And that really comes back to the old adage of talking the talk. So in this industry, it's important to note that we can't just talk the talk, but we have to walk the walk when it comes to safety. Sometimes folks' lives are at risk, especially if they're tired and behind the wheel or out shuffling sidewalks with moving vehicles all around them. So with that being said, accountability is key to ensuring some of these safety standards. Many claim that accountability starts at the top, though. So how can owners or company leadership, folks like yourself, how can they ensure that they're modeling this safety culture, modeling safety? Edwin, can you start by telling us a little bit about how East Coast does this?
In our organization, we have a saying, and many of these have come from the owner, Joshua, but it's show me a bad kid and I'll show you a bad parent. So let's say as parents, we try to do the best we can for our kids, right? Perhaps we watch our language. We want our kids to be successful, so we want to set a good example for them. So the same example goes, or the same principle goes for here at work, right? We, as business leaders, these are like our children. It's in our power to help them succeed. So if we think about our decisions before we make them, right? Perhaps the speed we're driving, or, maybe the tool that we're going for when we're trying to fix something in the shop, and perhaps we're all rushing and it might be very easy to cut a corner and do something unsafe. But if we keep in mind that our employees are watching and they're going to copy our example, well, that's going to hopefully help us to stop and say, well, it'll take me a couple more seconds, maybe a few more minutes, but I'm setting a good example. And in the end, it's going to save me perhaps an incident or an accident in the future. But I would also add that it's important for, as business leaders, that we, or just anybody in the organization, right? We're all equals when it comes to safety. So just because somebody's the owner or he's your manager, an employee shouldn't feel bad to point out to him, hey, you did something unsafe. And on the flip side, right, the person receiving that advice or that counsel should not be offended. Well, how is he going to tell me, right? If we level the playing field there, then everybody feels in a position where safety is my business, right? That's not the safety guy's responsibility, or that's not the manager's responsibility, but safety is everybody's business. So whether you're a shoveler on a job site, you're an operator, you feel empowered to stop the music or just say, hey, you need to correct this because this is a bad situation waiting to happen.
Excellent point. And I think that, to your point, that idea that it's safety is a team mentality is something we'll jump into a little later in discussion, but it's so important to continue to spotlight and kind of show here. So with that in mind, Michael, how about you? How do you see accountability as a part of the safety journey?
I am a firm believer in leading by example, as well as our senior group being as participative in the process of developing that culture. We may adhere to what we expect for safety, but if we aren't out there and if we aren't with our people and if we aren't exposing ourselves to the environment they're in, they may not see us on the same level as them. That's why I like Edwin's belief that we feel everyone's at the same level here. We hold everyone to the same expectations. So, and that's challenging, obviously, in some of our roles when we look to other people, whether it's above us or below us, especially the above us point. If we have people who aren't adhering to our safety rules and guidelines or, our expectations, addressing that with somebody at a higher level may be a little bit more of a challenge than someone at a lower level. Whereas when we really work on those initiatives with our groups and our field staff, we can get in there, we can get project managers involved, operations managers, and we can really get those initiatives spread throughout the company. But we have to have the leaders being present, showing that they're on board, they're part of what we're trying to push, and that they want to see us all be held to the same standard. So I fully agree with everything Edwin had to say, and that's kind of how I approach safety here, and that's definitely the culture we're building at Designscapes.
That's a good reminder. And I think something we're about to dive into even further is is really about this concept of accountability, not just being a top-down approach, but more so a team dynamic. The Super Bowl just ended this past week. March Madness is right around the corner. There's all this talk about team dynamic. So what would you say, Michael, about this concept of teamwork? A lot of folks argue that there's this idea around safety of being your brother's keeper, and by that we mean that watching out for your fellow team member whenever they're out doing their work, keep their accounts clean or team safe in the face of a snow event. But how do you think your team empowers employees to work together, have a team atmosphere, and hold one another accountable to some of these safety standards that we've started to talk about?
I think that one of the keys to that is really developing a culture that supports healthy communication, as well as being able to determine when a situation calls for coaching or discipline when it comes to safety. So I've worked for organizations, I've seen other organizations, they use disciplinary action as their tool for correction. But what we're finding now, and especially when we start crossing cultural boundaries and we've got staff from all over the world or different countries, it's a really delicate and artistic process to be able to get everyone to work as a team, have open communication, be able to receive feedback without getting frustrated or without getting angry. Us as managers, being able to take that feedback and being able to effectively communicate it to the people we need to, or addressing processes or policies and how we do and conduct business. So it takes the right individual, I think, to be able to support that and push that out in the company, but it can't be done if you don't have a team of fully on board safety minded professionals, which some of the best in the industry are those that have those like minded individuals that care about safety that's at the forefront of their mind. So they develop their team around that model. And with that comes just the seamless communication of being able to talk to each other and discuss problems or issues, or if they witness somebody else doing something in the field that is unsafe or they don't agree with. But if I don't set myself up as a leader to make myself open and for them to be able to communicate those worries to me in a confidential setting and address them, they aren't going to come to me with those problems. They're going to hide them, or they're going to start hiding other things, or then maybe they're going to feed off of it and start practicing unsafe behaviors as well. So I think keeping that open and very personal environment is extremely important in building your teams.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks, Michael. I think that, at least what I'm hearing is that there's this need for communication across all verticals. There's this need for the team to be together, both in snow events and outside of snow events, so that they know how to communicate across those channels, regardless of, what situation they're in. And you're right, that is important. And so that goes not only to the safety culture, but just the general culture of the team. So very important. And Edwin, I think I've read in some past issues of Snow Business that East Coast has a committee structure that helps promote some of this teamwork and some of this culture around safety within the organization. Could you talk a little bit about this committee structure, how it works, and how it helps to promote safety?
Yeah, and I've been meaning to comment on this. Michael had mentioned earlier about talking to groups as if they were individuals, right? So you could say that a leadership or an executive group could make tons of policies, right? And then safety isn't practical anymore. Then safety becomes a burden. So you sort of need that communication, that bridge between the two, so that you meet in the middle, right? And you can do things safely, but still efficiently. And you're also not, caught up in all the potential hazards, right? Because if that was the case, right, I don't think any of us would leave our home, especially after COVID, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So our safety committee is comprised of managers and field employees. And we do invite guests from time to time from the field or from different roles or positions in the company. And we talk about, what are you seeing? What are the hazards? What's going on at your facility? So we look to have representation at every one of the locations. And those guys are, you could say, they're safety ambassadors, or they're keeping an eye on things. And then we can take proactive measures to correct them. So we can talk about, hey, we made this policy change. How is it being received? Have we gotten any feedback? How can we better it? What things are you lacking? What do you need? Or then we can also follow up on other things in the past. Hey, we wanted this to happen. Did we reach the goal, or where are we in terms of reaching that goal? So it's a nice opportunity for, you could say, field employees to feel like they're being heard, and as well, they can bring the feedback from the field, because like Michael mentioned, right, we, as much as we would love to be with the guys in the field, we can't, we have a lot on our desk, a lot on our plate, and there's only so many hours in the day. So it's a nice opportunity. We meet every month. Some meetings are a little bit longer than others. The quarterly meeting every 3 months we'll meet for no more than 2 hours. We'll try to keep it at an hour and a half max. But other than that, we check in every month, half hour, an hour tops, and we just keep the ball rolling on whatever initiatives we have. And I enjoy it. It's one of the things that even if one day I'm, let's say, not the chairman, I would still like to be involved, because safety is important to me. And I think that's where a lot of good things happen. We can really make a proactive change for our employees, and something that they feel like they're contributing to the overall mission of the organization.
Thanks, Edwin. I think that's a very good point. I think it's one that's been echoed a few times throughout conversation, is involving all agents of the organization, if you will, all individuals within the company in this mission of safety is something that's going to help the whole company succeed. It's going to help us be more efficient and more profitable, probably on a number of levels. So, safety kind of plays into all these things. So, very good point. I appreciate you telling us a little bit about the committee structure. It's something that not everyone has, so it's a unique tool that may be useful based on the size of your team, scope of your work, and things like that. May not be applicable to everyone. So
maybe I could add a little something to that. Depending on the state you live in, having a certified safety committee, you could get discounts or rebates on your workers' comp premiums. So there is some financial incentive beyond that of just everyone working safer.
Yeah, could I add on to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Edwin makes a great point. So, and actually, too, one of the fine-lined and kind of gray area requirements of OSHA, too, depending on the size of your organization, you have to have a committee set up. So, like, fortunately for us, as we started growing, we've really taken that, too. We have a very similar structure to Edwin's, and I have to say, like him, it's probably one of the most enjoyable parts of my job. I think it's an opportunity to sit down, get feedback, and just have everyone's undivided attention for an hour to focus on what's happened and how we can really set action items until the next monthly meeting. What are those things we need to address? Are we seeing more slip and fall injuries? Well, why are we seeing them? Are there things we're doing or acting in a certain way to possibly influence those situations in happening more frequently? Or is the severity changing? Are we seeing different things because of our weather patterns with ice being on the ground for so long, or whatever it is? It just gives us a chance of time to kind of reflect on what's going on and what are we going to do to make the changes. And here's what we need to do by our next meeting. So it kind of helps keep everyone in focus, I think, with safety. And it gives them things to take back to their group to actually address and get done, because no one wants to come to that next meeting and say, I didn't talk about anything. I didn't have my tailgate talks. We had this slip and fall injury, but I forgot to talk to the guy. You want to go in and say, yeah, we had great conversations. We actually got him in front of our team. We got him to talk about it and ways he could have prevented it or things we need to look out for next time. So huge fan of safety committees. So props to Edwin as well for doing that, because I think it makes an awesome impact on the company.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor of today's podcast.
When plowing is your profession, it's up to you to keep the world moving through winter's worst. Less time worrying about your equipment is more time for clearing lots. So we'll cut to the chase. Only Western builds efficiency into every feature of our plows and spreaders. With 65 years of experience behind us, we know what it takes to save time and stay profitable. So we make one promise: more jobs done faster.
Okay, welcome back, and thank you to today's sponsor. We are here at Snow Talk. We're talking with Edwin Torres and Michael Wagner about creating a safety culture in the snow and ice profession. Accountability, teamwork, strategic safety priorities are what we've touched on thus far, and they are all important to safety cultures. There are also a number of other ways to engage the team that we've talked about. But another tool to keep the team safely working is obviously training. Could you tell us a little bit more about the training programs your companies employ to keep your team sharp and focused? And is there any specific training that sticks? And by that I mean that stays with your team more than others. Michael, we'll go ahead and start with you here.
Sure. Yeah, I think we take a multi-dimensional approach. So we utilize a web-based learning management system. We do a lot of hands-on training, different activities, whether it's equipment operation, snowplow, loading and unloading, equipment usage. So we kind of try and use a blend of it. Plus, we get safety tailgate talks in there weekly with the crews. It just depends on what the activity is. So I think you really have to focus on what are these employees' job responsibilities and what is going to drive home our objectives and goals the most. So I think what I've found in this industry, though, is that people are more of hands-on and visual learners. Doing the computer bit is a little tough. I think it's a great way to get out very standardized training as a preface to the hands-on. So it's great to know that maybe the technical knowledge behind how something works. But then when you get to the application of actually how to do it, hands-on is a must. So it's extremely important that you kind of examine your environment, you look at your staff, you try and figure out how am I going to get them to be most effective with the information we've got, and how do I want them to apply it? So it takes time to understand and learn that with your staff, but I think once you do it, it changes things a lot, and I think it keeps training much more entertaining and interactive. And when you do that, I think you have a better opportunity to permanently affect an individual and change their behavior, like we talked about earlier. So you got to get creative, but that's one of the fun things with safety and training is I think there's the opportunity to get out there and be creative and just do all sorts of different things to make it fun, make it different and enjoyable, so people don't get burned out on it.
How about you, Edwin? Anything that really sticks or is more effective than something else when it comes to training specifically?
Yeah, I think Michael said it well. You got to have a blend. You got to know your audience. You got to understand what is the best way to reach the individuals you're trying to reach. And we could think of personal experience, and I think we've all been in places where you kind of sat there and somebody's just talking and talking and talking, and you're just like, when is this going to be over? And perhaps you get something good out of it, but it's sort of like a painful process. So I'd say one of the goals that I've had, as well as when I've worked with other trainers or other people that, let's say, take the lead in our safety discussions, is to make it enjoyable for everybody. Let's bring interesting facts. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a discussion. Let's make it something that is, while we're learning, it feels like we're just having a conversation. And I would say that, in the initial stages, perhaps, you get few hands, but there's some topics where you're just like, sorry guys, we got a time limit and we can't hear from all of you. So it's really important to just not necessarily think of the subject matter that we are trying to present, because some of those are very vast and you could go into a rabbit hole, but just think of the end user, the person receiving that, what's going to be most practical, most functional for them. And if you work sort of backwards that way, then we can perhaps, maybe you have a big topic and you cut it down into pieces, and that way it's a little bit more enjoyable rather than just talking someone's ear off.
One of my final questions here is tool specific. So in this industry, we're always looking for a tool that maybe helps, or a resource. So a tool or a resource that your teams maybe couldn't or shouldn't go without whenever they're heading out to take care of a snow event. Anything that you've reflected on, Edwin, that you say, hey, this is something that my team needs to reflect on before they head out the door, something they need to have in hand?
I can't say that I can think of like a specific tool, but as we know with snow events, every event is different, right? So if we take that into account, we take the forecast, we think about what are the best, right? And we're here kind of transitioning into more of an operational plan, but obviously safety is still part of that. You want to lay out the expectations for the event, right? We are expecting ice, we're expecting rain, whatever the case is, we can tailor our approach, or let's say our plan of attack for this event. And we also have to think about not just our core group of guys, right? Our guys that are with us day in and day out, and they know us very well. We also have to think about those guys that are with us seasonally. So having some type of huddle or way of disseminating a plan and sort of a strategy to all of the workers for a job site, whether that means that we're going to each site and having a huddle, or whether there's one key guy that can take care of a group. I think that would be important, and that would be a great tool to ensure that everybody's focused on safety and just making sure that all of our bases are covered. And again, right, we bring up about the discussion time. So maybe someone has a really good suggestion and they could say, hey, last time we had an event like this on this site, this is what we did, and that worked out very well for us. You know what, guys? If that worked out very well, that's great. I love it. Do what you guys do best. That's why we have these conversations.
Communication. That's a good one. How about you, Michael? Any tool or thought or checklist that you may reflect on, that your team needs to reflect on as they hit the road in the face of an event?
Yeah, I mean, I'm similar to Edwin. Ours is really that preparedness tool and just being able to prepare ourselves for any situation. So communication obviously is one of the biggest components in that, whether it's cell phones, whether it's CB radios or backup forms of communication, knowing who to contact if a certain circumstance arises, whether it's a vehicle accident, whether it's property damage, whether you can't make it to the site because something came up or site conditions change drastically. And so you need to start changing up the materials you're using or how you're plowing it or how many people you need on site. So preparing people for the unknown and just making sure they have the proper winter clothes, food, water, beverage, stuff to get them through potential extended snow events. You never know. I've been in snow shifts before where I've worked a couple hours, and I've been in some that were supposed to be 2 inches and it ended up being almost 3 feet of snow. So you never know when you're going to be out there for 24 to 36 hours and you aren't going home until you're done. So you just got to plan for the unknown. Just think of every what if scenario and make sure you've got everything you need, as much as you can think, to get you through that situation. So the communication's huge component of preparedness for a storm.
Yeah, good point. And I think that two pieces of advice that my dad has always given me is that it never hurts to over prepare and it never hurts to over communicate. So final question here. Finally, I'd love to learn a little more about a situation where the safety training, safety priorities, or the safety preparedness that your company promoted came into play.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to tag along to the preparedness piece. So I think one of the most important tools to teach your employees is preparing for the possibility of vehicle incidents and how we respond to them. So the information that we need, who we need to contact, whether it's contact an emergency services, then we got to contact our office staff, operational managers. We got to start working with our insurance carriers, the other party's insurance carriers. But knowing how to address that when it arises, because when you're out and you've got, like us, we've got 115 vehicles on the road, plus all of our heavy equipment, which is off the road. But people traveling at all hours of the day in possibly extreme conditions. And when something arises, which a lot of the times it does happen because of the way it is driving in winter events like that, having them calmly know how to address and handle that situation can be a game changer for them in being able to still be productive, complete site services on time. If they get in an accident, they can't make it now to 4 sites in that morning by 7 a.m. They know who they've got to contact to be able to get them there to take care of it, which ultimately alleviates a lot of stress off of themselves. Instead of now they're having to worry about, who do I call? What do I do in this situation? Some people have a hard time handling that amount of stress, but to reduce that stress, you've got to prepare people on how to act in those situations. So vehicle training and incident training, I think, is one of the greatest tools that you can teach your staff every year, every quarter. When we get onboarding of new employees, doing the hands-on training, getting them in front of the vehicles and equipment, teaching them the ins and out of it, and then where documents are, where the registration insurance is, what photos to take, grabbing witness cards. That's one of the biggest things, is making sure if I've got a crew with me and if something happens, I want to make sure that everyone in the car who witnessed what happened, my shovelers, other operators, we're all on the same page and we collectively can be there to help each other get through this. So I think a lot goes into it that helps manage the stress of employees in extreme circumstances.
Edwin, how about you? Final thought here.
Yeah, I could think of a particular instance in which we had a long duration event. I think had been snowing probably close to 3 days. And as Michael mentioned, right, there's no shifts here. Sorry, we got to get the job done. So sometimes we use like the saying, no news is good news, right? And that sort of can give us like a false sense of confidence, right? So I remember it was instructed to all job sites, doesn't matter what you're doing, where you're at this specific time, we're going to stop the music. We're going to stop. We're going to refocus. We're into it already 24, 36 hours. So somewhere in between there, I don't recall if it was the second day or leading into the third day, but we took the best opportunity, right, to just stop, get everybody to refocus on safety. It presented a time to address any last minute change-ups, whether it be personnel changes or areas of focus of specific personnel. And although there had been no issues, that just sort of reset the clock, right? And we were proactive. We were able to refocus everybody, get them to feel a little bit refreshed. They get out in the cold air. They're out of their equipment. They stood. They kind of chuckled with each other. They laughed. They told some jokes. And I think that was a good proactive measure where we really need to look out for those because, right, the job, the work that needs to get done is always going to be there. So the 15, 20, let's say 30 minutes we took out to do that, it didn't really set us back any further, right? We looked for the best time. There was a little bit of a lull in between the weather pattern. So taking those moments is key. Another saying, I guess, that I could share that we have here in the organization is don't walk away from problems, addressing them in the moment and not saying, well, we'll deal with that after the event. So take it head on, deal with the issue, and that'll save us a lot of headaches on the back end.
I thank both of you for your time today. Michael, Edwin, it's been a pleasure learning about the cultures that you both are working to promote within Designscapes Colorado and the East Coast facilities, respectively.
Yeah. Thank you, Evan. And thanks to Sima as well for having us. This was an awesome chance to get to sit and talk about safety, which is always a good time.
Yeah, I got to echo Michael's words. I appreciate the opportunity. And I guess we can be very sometimes guarded about, business practices or things like that. But when it comes to safety, if one of us wins in safety, we all win. And moments like this where we can talk and we can learn from each other is very important for the industry and for each and every one of us as individuals.
It's definitely no small task to do the work that you all do and that your teams do. And we are sure that the communities that you work within, they appreciate the attention to detail and safety that you all bring to the table. Furthermore, we're confident that your team's families appreciate you getting them home safely every night. That's obviously a huge part of the reason we do what we do in safety. And then, gentlemen, thanks again just for spending some time on Snow Talk with us today. I'd also be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank our loyal listeners who are sure to take something away from this awesome podcast. And another special thanks to our sponsors for making today's episode possible.
Thanks for joining us for Snow Talk, sponsored by Western Snowplows. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out the latest episodes of Snow Talk, including any you may have missed, at www.sima.org/podcast.